What is the small church syndrome? Stick around for this episode of the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malfers Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, AJ Matthew. You know, AJ, there's no such thing as small churches, only small thinking.
Oh, good setup.
It's become, I think, in vogue, and I think we should give proper credit to folks like Mark Clifton and others who have started calling small churches normative-sized churches instead of small churches, because the reality is that most churches, in the United States at least, are, I think the median sized church is 75 people. So all churches in the United States, half of churches are 75 or fewer. And I think that something like 90% of churches are under 300, something like that.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on those exact numbers. So I think you might click on an episode like today's and think that we're going to be critical of churches that are small and say, well, you've got to if you want to be important, you got to be big. And that is actually not the point of today's episode. We are going to critique small church syndrome and small church thinking, which I do think is not healthy in many instances. And we're going to take some time to define what we mean by that and then kind of help you to think in a different way.
Yeah. You may be small, but what are the reasons? There's always reasons. A lot of it is circumstance, environment, geography, whether you're rural or urban, because in an urban environment, you might have a small church that's, very neighborhood centric. It could be lots of small churches in your area that end up covering a large population, or you might be rural and you're just never going to be very large. But the question that, I think regardless of what your size is, I'm not saying this is only for small church pastors, regardless of your size, you should be asking yourself, are we maximizing our capacity and our capabilities? So that's more of what the focus is optimization and intentionality, and in getting as large as you can be. And again, the only reason for that, even to say that, people are like, well, I don't need to be large. Well, yeah, you do. We're supposed to be about kingdom growth, right? So we need to be as large as we are able to gather for the kingdom. And we do that, I think, with some good principles and structure for growth that will allow us to think kingdom sized.
All right. I'll play the contrarian here on the podcast, even though this is my article and I wrote it. I'll play the contrarian here and say, I think that you can continue to be a small church, even if it's theoretically possible for you to be a larger church. You can be a small church and still have a substantial impact, and that might look different. So you could be the driving force behind revitalizing other churches in your community. So maybe your church doesn't get much larger, but you help other churches in your area get healthier, and so they start to catch up to where you're at. Maybe that looks like planting other campuses or other churches in your area, so your little local congregation stays 200 or under. So planting churches, revitalizing churches. Maybe it looks like you adopting satellite campuses. So you adopt some unhealthy churches and help them grow. Maybe they were 15, 20 people and then they become a church of 100 or 150. So your church doesn't have to actually get bigger. Your church doesn't have to physically get larger in order for you to have a big influence and for that influence to grow. And so I think what we want to emphasize is the early churches would have all been very small, but they spread. So we're not interested in the size of the local congregation. We are interested in the spread of your impact. And so when you were focused on the right thing, that's what growth looks like. So you may or may not become a larger church physically. I don't really care that much about that. What we're challenging today is small church thinking, which puts an artificial ceiling on the Great Commission impact that your church can have locally and globally. Is that an okay contrarian perspective to have,
Well,
AJ?
let me push back on your pushback. So
Okay.
if there if
I've been told that the people like it when we disagree with each other. So
that's true, people I get
improve
that
our
feedback
ratings.
too. People seem to like some of our friendly exchanges that we have. So, okay, if a
You should
church
see our unfriendly exchanges.
if a if a church
Just kidding.
has optimized what it does in order to
Uh-huh.
if a church is healthy enough and optimized enough to be focusing on helping other churches do that, that church throughout
Mhm.
that process 99.9% of the time will have grown itself. So, you don't, you're not an unhealthy church that is like, we're not going to really do anything here locally. We want to optimize other churches. We want to help other churches grow. That probably, I don't know that a church would exist that is doing that. So you're either already doing really well and probably have reached your theoretical limit, and now you're going out and doing the things that you just said, Scott, or you're in a position to implement what we're going to talk about today. You will experience likely some growth from that. And then you can move out from your center and do that with other churches. I don't think you can stay how you are and do the things that you just described.
Oh, yeah, certainly. Yeah, I don't think we would disagree on that at all. I think what I'm suggesting is I think that a lot of people assume, okay, we get healthy, we start increasing our impact. That necessarily means we have to go into a building
Oh
campaign.
yeah, that
We
you
have
would
to increase our
continuously
size. We
grow.
have
Yeah,
to, we have to add. And I'm saying that doesn't have to be the case. You
yeah,
can become a healthy church
sure.
that's reaching people, and there are ways in which you can choose to leverage that health in ways that doesn't look like you becoming the next megachurch in your
Yeah,
city or the first megachurch in your city.
totally. I agree.
That's what I
I
mean.
agree with that. Yeah, every church is going to reach some sort of theoretical limit. You still need to be healthy and in a position in which, because there's always attrition. People die, people move. You need to not shrink. So you have to be healthy enough to at least maintain your kind of your theoretical limit of size. And yeah, be reaching out and trying to help other churches do that, or yeah, launch campuses, plant churches, whatever. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think now this is a very large church, but I think an interesting example of this would be, and I know some people have their issues with him lately, but just in principle, I think an example of this would be Village Church there in your neck of the woods,
Yeah.
Flower Mound. Um, they had at one point very many campuses. They decided to spin many of those campuses off as autonomous churches, so they kind of made an intentional get small sort of strategy. I think they still have some campuses beyond their main campus in Flower Mound, Flomo, as the natives call it, I believe. Um,
Do they?
one of those,
Do they call it?
yeah,
I'm not from there.
Flomo,
Yeah.
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Um, so, I'm like so ADD. But one of those was East Side Christian Church, East Side Community Church. That's what I mean to say. Which took over or adopted or merged with, I don't know what the appropriate language would be, Schofield Memorial Church, my home church growing up in Dallas. They took over the facility and they merged because that church, my church, sadly had declined significantly. Anyways, all that to say, like, good things happened with that actual sort of get what others might perceive as actually getting smaller by releasing those campuses, kind of spurred on some other things, but it was only able to happen because it was born out of a healthy place. Like it wasn't born out of small church thinking or small church syndrome. There was a strategy involved there that was actually Great Commission focused. And so I guess that's where I'm trying to shift the thinking. Is it's not really about the numbers in particular. It's the thinking behind what we're doing
Yeah.
really influences a lot of this. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely.
I guess it is, since again I wrote the article, so I'll stand by what I said. All right, so let's we've danced around this enough. Let's define, for the purposes of this episode and for the purposes of the article, which you can find at malforsgroup.com/210. What do I mean by small church syndrome? Let's lay that out for the folks.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, a few primary things that that would outline that: pastor-centric decision making. So yeah, the having, basically just the one person at the top is the one kind of processing through all this. I mean, what could we do? What are we doing? What needs to be done? Not having that spread out over more of an optimized leadership structure, decision making structure.
Yeah. So on this point, real quick, this is different in kind from what we talked about last. Was it in last week's episode where we talked about sort of abusive pastors and narcissistic pastors?
Yeah.
Even in large churches, you can see sort of pastor-centric thinking. But if the church is larger, very likely the pastor's not able to make every decision. They probably have. It's still pastor-centric in that every major decision has to go through the pastor and what he wants. But very likely he's even a narcissistic pastor, if the church is large enough, has learned how to delegate certain types of decision making. What we're not focused on that. What I'm talking about is situations where the pastor is the bottleneck. He's de facto on every committee. Everyone looks to him before any decision gets made. Well, we got to run that by a pastor. If that's the case, that's sort of, it may or may not be connected to narcissism. Very often it's not.
Right. Most of the time it's not. Yeah.
Most of the time it's not. It's just really inefficient. It's just a structural problem,
Yeah.
not a personality problem.
Yeah. We'll also mention that here in a moment. Pastoral overload. So what you just described, Scott, also contributes to that. I mean, he's already got a million things he's doing because he is the only person that makes those decisions. And then you throw on top of that all the needs of the congregation, in hospital visits and counseling and all these other things. So it's easy to become overwhelmed and overloaded.
Yeah, they do the majority, almost exclusively all of the pastoral care or congregational care falls on his shoulders.
Yeah.
Which leaves no room for leadership tasks.
Yeah. Yeah. And then frequently, again, when a lot of things are centered on one person, when that person reaches kind of their limit on what they can process and manage in their time, that then becomes the effect for the whole church. So in the context of the mission of the church, the Great Commission, that a lot of times is one of the things that ends up not happening. Like there's so much happening internally that we're like, I can't even think about doing something outside, or doing something maybe even, they probably not on a conscious level, but oh my gosh, if we get any bigger, there's no way I could even manage that. So, sometimes small church syndrome is putting these artificial limits on size because you're at the capacity of the leadership structure to maintain it. And then it just kind of by virtue then has a self-setting limit. And Great Commission then becomes a casualty of that.
Yeah. So I'll marry this to the next point, which is program over purpose, where we just kind of get in the habit of doing certain things, and we don't really know why we do those things. and if I kind of made you defend it, very often the defense would be that people like it, or that it's well attended, or that if I made a change, people would be angry. And none of those are good reasons. You can't give me a discipleship reason why this thing is important. So marrying that with the previous thing where you said about stagnation and Great Commission work, the sort of parish model that the small church structure is often built on works fine in a cultural Christian context. It doesn't work well at all in a post-Christian, de-churched context. So if the primary role of the pastor is as a caretaker, then this is fine. And in a cultural Christian in America, it's fine because you have a whole bunch of churches that are filled up with pretty much the majority of the population. There's not much mission work that's needed to be done because we're reached. And what we have is churches that are stuck in that mode. They assume cultural Christianity. They're built for cultural Christianity. They're not built for post-Christian America. And so mission isn't happening because mission didn't need to happen on the same level for a great many years. And so that's why this is happening.
Yeah, and then we already sort of talked about this with the kind of the pastor being the bottleneck, but an inefficient leadership structure in general that just doesn't allow for decisions to be made at the speed in which they, could be helpful and implemented quickly. It's just bogs things down. And a lot of times it tires people out as well because they're not able to see progress. They're not able to see change. When an idea might take so long to be approved or implemented that it sort of loses its flavor quickly.
Yeah, so we've talked on the pastor side of things, but very often in small church thinking, it's not just the pastor. It's certain decisions need to be made by the whole congregation, and very often it's relatively small decisions that have to be made by the whole congregation. Or there's 3 or 4 different committees that at least have to speak into it or have an awareness of something, even if they're not having to make a decision. And so that's really, really, really inefficient, considering that most of these committees probably only meet once a month at most. And so, if it has to cycle through 2 or 3 or 4 different committees and it's a relatively small decision, you're talking about a decision runtime of 2, 3, 4 months. And that's just not a way to get anything done. And so many churches, AJ, that we run into are structured in this way, and it makes absolutely zero sense. But they get very defensive if you say, maybe we should do something different.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times those committees too, that gets counted as, whatever somebody says their service area is in the church. Even some committees might only meet like as needed or a few times a year. And so sometimes they're just occupying leadership and volunteer space in which somebody could be way more effective doing something, that progresses the church towards its mission and vision goals instead of showing up for a meeting every now and then. So,
and totally, yeah, we'll talk about this more later too. But
episode on that probably.
Yeah. Why committees are terrible. That should be an episode
To get right to the point. Yeah.
Well, because very often these are deliberative bodies, not action bodies.
Yeah. Right.
So the pastor has to wait on them to deliberate and make a decision, but then they expect him to do all the work. It should be the opposite. Like certain key leaders make decisions very quickly, and then this committee, if it exists at all, should be an implementing body, not a deliberative one. That is a whole separate episode. We should make mental note. We need to do an episode on that.
All right. Okay, so let's get into some meat here, man. Breaking free of the small church.
Let's move through these pretty quick. I just want to, before we get into this, we're going to talk about 5 sort of strategies for breaking through this small church syndrome thinking, there's way more in the article. Like, you should read the article, because we don't want to keep you on this episode for an hour and a half. So that's my pitch to read it. We'll move relatively quickly through these 5 things.
Yeah. All right. So rigorously apply a Great Commission focus. As we mentioned above, the Great Commission and an external focus is what frequently gets stifled in small church syndrome. And again, not by intention at all. But it's unfortunate. I don't know. Maybe this is the work of Satan. I mean, that we would just become overloaded so that we can't do what Christ called us to do. But reorienting around the Great Commission, and then having to strip away the things that are preventing us from doing that, is a significant shift for the church out of the small church syndrome and into the kingdom position, kingdom growth mindset.
This is such a common thing, and I know we talk about it a lot on the podcast, but you can't get away from it. We can't escape this. It's that so many churches know how to say the right things, but when you scratch a little bit below the surface, there is no rigorous application of Great Commission thinking in the church. It's just platitudes. It's like, yeah, we care about the Great Commission. All right, but do we? I mean, because I'm looking around what we're doing, and it doesn't seem to line up. And this is one of the things when we do a church ministry analysis with churches, this comes up a lot, that churches will say we have a good Great Commission focus, we have a Great Commission mission statement, all these things. They'll say all the right stuff. And then when we apply pressure to prove that out, there's no there. And so, if you really want to break free from the small group syndrome, we give some tips for how to do this in the article. It has to start with just a rigorous commitment to the Great Commission and being willing to do hard things and say hard things to hard people and have hard conversations when the reality of our ministry is in conflict in some way with the manifestation of the Great Commission in our church.
Yeah. Sure. Ending with an altar call every Sunday is fine. But if you haven't had a guest in 3 years, who are you preaching to? I mean, maybe somebody else will make a decision, but not because you've gone out, you didn't go and make disciples. You stayed home. So,
well, and at best, so many of our churches are making regular attenders, not disciples.
Yeah. Big difference.
You know what I mean? Like, congratulations, you got folks to show up at a program. I mean,
yeah.
We'll just kind of a transition
Speaking
to the next
of that,
one.
our second strategy is a shift towards process-oriented discipleship instead of program-oriented discipleship. So, this idea of structuring the church for discipleship outcomes, not things to put on people's calendars, because they're not wholly different. We're not going to act wholly different in all cases. We're going to change the way we think about things. So we might still have small groups. We might still have Sunday school. We might still have some kind of a Bible fellowship class. But we're going to understand why we're doing it, and we're going to do it for a particular outcome. We're going to intentionally disciple people with the way we structure our ministries, not simply keep doing the same thing over and over again that may or may not be effective. So it's critical look at what are we doing now? How well is it doing it? What should we doing? What should we be doing? How do we need a structure to achieve that?
Yeah. Okay. Here's a weird thought. 2 couples show up at a restaurant, and they're both on a date, right? They're both been married the same number of years or whatever. They show up in the same restaurant, same night, and they can have completely different experiences if the heart behind that date is different. You can go. What I'm saying is, you can go through the motions. We went out. We went on a date, and it can still be like lifeless and dead and crummy, or it can be really enriching. It can be really life giving. There can be a good conversation, and there can be you know it can be something that really affirms and builds up the marriage. Like it's not the act of going to the restaurant and sitting together and having a meal. That alone isn't it. Like, you have to know why you're doing it in order for it to really be something that is building up that relationship. And so when we're encountering churches and talking with churches, what I'm always after is I don't care what your program is. Like, I really don't. What bothers me is when a church can't explain to me, why are you doing this? Why the Sunday school class? Why the annual chili cook-off? Why the fill in the blank program event? And the answers we get are awful. People really like this. It's really well attended. It's something that people look forward to. If we made any changes to this, people would be upset. And the word discipleship doesn't come up one time, not one time. Manifestly show me how this program is resulting in discipleship fruit. You want to preserve the same program? I don't care. But if we're going to do it, it needs to produce fruit. And if it doesn't, why are we doing it?
Yeah.
Should we reevaluate it? And so these are the kinds of conversations that, if you want to break free from small church syndrome, these are the kinds of discussions that leaders have to have. Why are we doing this? Leadership doesn't mean necessarily torpedoing a program in the name of change, because you can end up in the exact same boat with the same fruitless outcome with a different program. It's the thought process and the thinking behind the program. If that couple who had a lifeless date went to a different restaurant, it'd be the same outcome, because the problem wasn't the restaurant. The problem was we didn't know why we were going on a date in the first place. Does that make sense? Just tracking?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, are we a church or a country club? I mean, country clubs provide programming. They have activities. People enjoy them. Sometimes they build relationships with other people because they're doing the same thing that they enjoy. But there's no outward purpose to it. There's nothing. The mission of the country club isn't to get out and get everybody to become golfers. There's no country club outreach like, hey, everybody should play golf. You want to come try some golf? It's just like, hey, come if you want to. It's fun if that's what you're into. And a lot of churches end up kind of looking that way as well. Just kind of doing these activities, like you said, people like it. Some of the things are well attended, other things not so much. So yeah, that's not church thinking. That's not kingdom thinking. It's not a kingdom mindset.
All right, number 3 is we need to optimize the leadership structure for empowerment. This is often maybe the most difficult, because people get really upset. It is that classic, like, who moved my cheese book, where you start going, well, what if we didn't have these committees, or what if we? And I've seen a lot of churches go, well, we don't have committees. We call them teams. Okay, but does it function like a committee? Because if it does, it doesn't really matter. You can slap a new title on it, and it's the same thing. So what we see, again, we described this problem earlier. It's committees that have to make decisions. The whole congregation has to vote on certain things. So what healthy churches do is they look for what is the most efficient structure that we can have, so that the smallest number of people are needed to make a decision at the smallest level. So think of this like a government thing. It's like the federal government shouldn't be making decisions about what's happening in your local park, right? The local Parks and Rec, not committee, but board or department. Maybe that's the right word. they should be able to make decisions. They've been given a budget. They've been given the authority to just execute things. So in your church, are you built in such a way where teams have the authority to make decisions within certain preset boundaries? Those can be even things that cost money up to a certain point, and then in which case it then needs to be escalated. Like, that's what efficient churches do, is they're able to go, all right, hey, we trust you, and if you make a mistake, we'll hold you accountable and we'll train you up through the mistake. But we're not going to hold you up. We're not going to hold you hostage out of the hypothetical fear that you might make a mistake or you might do something that we disagree with. And that fear holds so many churches back. So you need a team that can make quick, small decisions, but then make more thoughtful, major decisions. That often looks like centralizing power among a plurality of leaders through the form of a small board. You actually can't have thoughtful major decisions when the whole congregation has to be involved in the major decision, because then you have to spend all your time explaining. So you can't have real discussion. You can't have a thoughtful process because you're spending the whole time just trying to build up a constituency around the thing that you're trying to effectuate. Whereas if you were to centralize some power within like an elder board, you could actually deliberate over 3, 6, 9 months on a decision. If it's a big one, look at it from all issues and all sides, and then make a decision.
Yeah.
So they're decentralized. Healthy churches are decentralized in all of the right ways and centralized in all of the right ways, which is not what happens in small churches.
Yeah. Yeah. Bringing decision making back into the ministry level spaces of the church is so much more efficient. And I think, you get better decisions. Like if the student ministry, the student pastor is like, we need, I'd like to replace our chairs and tables or something in our, like student ministry area so that we can facilitate better Bible study or discussion or something. Do we, first of all, if that's an idea, that idea should be brought up, during budget time. And we've got a budget for student ministry area. So they can then make that purchasing decision without it having to go back to the finance committee to spend, $800 on some tables and chairs. We would have, because what are they going to say then? I don't know if we need to do that. It's not a good idea this year. Well, if we already determined that was going to be helpful for student ministry, they should be empowered to be able to make that purchase then because the budget was already approved. And then on the other hand, do we need then it to go to the design committee to make sure that the style of the chairs or what they think is, going to be right and consistent with the adult Sunday school classes or something? So, I mean, that's just one minor example of layers of decisions that could have been brought back to the ministry area that is actually trying to achieve certain outcomes and needs, tools or resources to do that, instead of people that are disconnected from it. So plus then you're going to be like, okay, well, student pastor, come to our meeting. We meet on the third Wednesday. So come to the finance committee meeting and tell us why you think you should do that. And then the design committee, they meet on the fourth Thursday. So in a week and a half, you can come to that meeting and talk to us about, show us the ideas for the 3 different chairs that you had to submit. And we'll make that decision for you. This is literally what happened, Scott. I mean, and
right. And we're still just stuck on chairs. And yeah. And then we haven't gotten any real ministry done, but that takes up that staff member's attention.
Yep.
For a month and a half,
Right.
2 months
Exactly.
It's focused on convincing the church to spend $800 on a few tables and a few chairs. So this is, if you're listening to this, that this happens all the time. And it's what artificially creates a barrier for these churches, and it is self-imposed, and it's not necessary. There is a different way.
It's all distraction. It is distraction from keeping you from the main thing, making and maturing disciples of Jesus. It's all distraction. And the more we cut that out, the more we focus on the main thing.
Agree. All right, number 4.
Number 4, regularly communicate an inspiring picture of the future. Folks,
One might call that a vision.
we got to get focused on the vision. What in the world are we doing together? What are we here for? What has God placed on our heart to accomplish in our area? What change can we make? This is not even close to being part of the thoughts that are going through a lot of the pastors and leaders and ministry leaders in churches with small church syndrome. It's just, again, like the mission, the Great Commission. It's just, I don't have time for that. That would be, my brain would have to go into overload mode to start thinking. We are just trying to get through another week and put out fires and just take care of what's happening right now. And we've got to start thinking about a unifying vision of the future that then is going to, you're going to end up kind of reverse engineering back into that. If we start focusing on the vision, then we have to start focusing on how are we going to get there? What are our primary discipleship activities going to be? How are we going to be training people? And so, yeah, it's, you can't, things can't coexist. We can't be internally focused with tons of bureaucracy and people being overwhelmed with the things that they shouldn't be thinking about, and then go, hey, we're going to make a big impact. It doesn't work. We've got to refocus on everything.
Yeah. So here's a little thought. I think one of the reasons that we get held back in our thinking is fear. Fear that if we put out there a vision that we believe is from the Lord, that what if it doesn't happen, or what if it doesn't happen exactly the way that we're saying it should happen? And I just want to give you some encouragement, okay? So we have the story in Acts 16. Paul and Silas, they're traveling through Phrygia and Galatia, and they want to go to throughout the whole province of Asia, and the Holy Spirit prevents them from doing this. We don't get exactly the details on this. There's some evidence that maybe someone gets sick, because it's right after this that Luke enters the picture in the first person, and Luke is a physician, so perhaps someone is ill, and so Luke at some point in around Acts 16 joins the party. It's right after this, though, that Paul then has this vision of a man in Macedonia, right? And so then Paul says, well, I've had this vision from the Lord to go to see this man in Macedonia. Well, we get the story when Paul arrives in Macedonia. They go to the river. There's no synagogue there. There's no synagogue in the town. And so they go, if there's no synagogue, you would meet on the Sabbath by the river. So they go out to the river, and sure enough, there are no men there. No men. So here, Paul has had this vision in his mind from the Holy Spirit of a man in Macedonia. He goes there. There's no synagogue. Okay. So that part of the strategy isn't going to work. So we go to the river. That's where the Jews would meet on the Sabbath. There's no men here. And so you would immediately think, well, maybe I've missed this. Maybe I've got this all wrong. But what then Paul does is he preaches the gospel to the women who are there, the Jewish women who are there. And it's through this encounter then that he meets Lydia, and she invites him to stay in her home, and she becomes this huge funding partner for the expansion of the gospel throughout the rest of Paul's ministry. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, very often the execution of a vision looks very different from the picture that you have in your mind when it comes to you from the Lord. That doesn't mean it isn't from the Lord, and it doesn't mean that we should be afraid just because things end up looking different than they did in our minds. Does this make any sense,
Yeah.
AJ? Like, I think fear is what holds a lot of pastors back from keeping a vision in front of people at all times. And that's not a good reason for getting unfocused from the vision.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're onto something there. Yeah. Yeah, not being able to tell people maybe exactly what all the details are going to look like, or the timeline. Um, yeah, you maybe feel like, oh, am I just putting this something out there that I'm not even certain of myself? Sometimes that might even be the case. There's a little bit of discernment and trust that has to happen in a vision. I mean, Scott, we've even experienced that in our ministry, right? I mean, we've kind of do have a vision for the future of our ministry, and we aren't exactly sure how we're going to get there, but we are incrementally making steps to do that. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Well, and the one thing, like again, using Paul as an example here, the one thing that Paul absolutely could not have done is say, I guess I should just go back to Tarsus. You know,
yeah.
it's like, just go back home, just make the tents. It's, you have to keep moving forward, even when faced with the Holy Spirit prevented us from doing this thing that we thought we were supposed to do. Then presented with, there's no man here. Whatever the thing is that you get presented with, um, Paul keeps moving forward in that vision regardless.
So, it's probably, though, Scott, extremely unlikely that you're not reaching your city because the Holy Spirit's preventing you from doing that. So don't say, I think we have an Acts 16 thing happening here. I'd like to, really, but I don't think.
Well, if that's the conclusion you got from that story, you missed it. It's like,
I heard it on the Church Revitalization podcast. Scott said maybe the Holy Spirit's keeping us from reaching our city.
yeah, no, but the whole point of that story is that didn't prevent Paul from then going, well, then what else?
So
Then,
right, yep, that's right.
if it's not this, then what? What is it? Because going backwards isn't an option. Staying put, that's not an option. Where is it that you're calling us to go? And that's when he gets this vision of the man in Macedonia. It's in the same chapter. So that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah, no. The point is not, if you feel prevented from doing something, do nothing. The opposite.
That's right. Okay, let's work our way here towards the end. Our fifth barrier breaking strategy to get out of the small church syndrome is learning how to celebrate progress. Yeah, I mean, sometimes, like the vision, maybe we don't know even what our third step is going to be, let alone our 19th step. We also don't know, how long is it going to take to hit like these big pinnacle moments. And while that's great, we should be looking and working towards those. Did we just have something pretty cool happen? If we did, let's talk about that. Let's celebrate that. Starting with low-hanging fruit, but moving on from there, man, you got to keep this in front of people. We've got to celebrate the small wins, because it's a collection of small wins that add up to the big wins. And, I love seeing this, Scott, specifically whenever, we can just take a few minutes on a Sunday morning and go, hey, church, I just want to tell you about something really cool that's happening over, in our children's ministry, or that, this team had happened this week, or this individual that just got connected into a small group. And I've invited them up to just spend a couple minutes telling you about their story. Those are the things I think that get people charged up, especially seeing things happening with people that are involved in certain ministry areas, or something that's happened with them personally, or a sweet conversation that they had that was really meaningful. Seeing yourself in ministry involves seeing other people like you in ministry. And talking about these small things, I think that's how you can get one more person to go, you know what? That's pretty cool. I think I could do that. I'd like to get involved with that. And it's those small celebration moments that can really move you forward in your vision.
Yeah, I was speaking with a lay leader in a church that I've worked with this year in a rural state. Their community is a few hundred people. Their whole community is under 500 people, under 300 people, I think. It's a very, very small community. and the church had been averaging in the 30s. They've gone through strategic envisioning. They've been really good at following through on implementation. Now the church is averaging, they were in the like mid to upper 30s. Now they're in the mid to upper 50s, sometimes 60 plus. So the church has grown on a percentage basis a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, nearly doubled. And, I guess when you're that size, maybe it doesn't feel like, oh, our church has doubled, but it has. And so I was encouraging this lay leader. I'm like, you should be celebrating this. Like, find some artificial milestone, 6 months or 9 months or whatever it would be, and throw a party, have some cake, and celebrate that, because week by week it maybe doesn't feel like much, but it is a lot. They run an after school program for their community school. Last year they had maybe 12, 15 kids, and it met once a month. Now they meet every week and they have 30 kids. So it's twice as many students.
Amazing.
And it's happening every week. And in a community of, a few hundred people, that's making a big impact. And they're saying, well, we're not seeing as many people maybe coming into the Lord, or many people from the community showing up. We kind of just reclaimed a lot of the folks we had lost. And I'm like, hold on a minute. It's just been a few months. Give it time. You have to win people over, right? I mean, you have to prove that this is real. You have to prove that you're here for the long haul, that there really is change. Plus, they're in a leadership transition. They have no pastor right now. So they've done all of these things and they have no pastor. It's just been totally led by their lay leadership. And so they've got some folks in the congregation, reason why I'm sharing the story, who are saying, well, this has been a lot. It's a lot of change really fast. And considering that nothing had happened for a long time, it is a lot of change. But I was encouraging this lay leader, when you have those conversations with folks and they say those kinds of things, ask them, which positive change that has occurred would you like to have not happened? Name the thing. Name the 5 kids that you'd like for us not to be ministering to every week. Name the person who's sitting in the pews who hasn't been here for years that you'd like to kick back out of the church. When it goes back to reframing. That maybe don't ask that, because maybe they have someone that they'd like to see go. But to reach people with the good news and make disciples of all nations, and we're doing that. So it can feel scary, and it can feel like a lot, but what an adventure. This is the thing that, to quote the, was it Stephen Curtis Chapman song? Adventure, saddle up your horses. We got a trail to blaze. Whoa. Through the wild blue yonder of God's amazing grace. What, you know this song? You don't know. Yeah, you didn't grow up in
Maybe if I heard it.
culture that I did.
I'll join in on some awesome God with
anyways, you. The point is, part of your job is to constantly be reframing things and redirecting back to the Great Commission, because you're going to have people who just temperamentally are going to have a harder time catching up. It doesn't mean that they won't go there with you, but you're going to have to constantly be reframing it through what matters most, not through the lens of the specific strategic change that's happening.
Here you go. Small church thinking, small church syndrome, not about the numbers, but about your intentionality, your vision for the future, and seeking. Yeah, it's the mindset, seeking to grow the kingdom and carry out the Great Commission that we've all been charged with. This has been episode 210 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. So more details over at malfersgroup.com/210. You can get the link to the YouTube video over there, and love for you to drop us a comment either there on the article or over on YouTube. Also, we love engaging with you and hearing your thoughts on these things. Also, while you're on the website, click on that donate button because we need you to participate with us in our ministry. And we've got trips coming up really soon. Scott and I are going to be in Turkey. We've got several places in Europe coming up. And then into 2024, Ethiopia, several African trips that we're trying to get funded, Tanzania, Burundi, and others that we need your church to help with. We've got teaching to do with pastors in a lot of these locations. We've got one-on-one church work happening in revitalization efforts and training up leaders in the church. And we need your participation to help us to bring that out there. So click on that donate button and or open a conversation with us about partnering with your church in your mission too. Thanks for being with us on the Church Revitalization Podcast. We'll see you next week.